Are you ready for the ultimate adventure? Sail the seven seas with Sinbad, join King Arthur's legendary Round Table, and fight for justice with Robin Hood. From the deserts of Arabia to the battles of ancient China, witness the world's greatest heroes in one epic collection. Epic heroic adventures where bravery knows no limits. Let the quest begin. In a tranquil village nestled at the foot of the mist-covered mountains of ancient China, there lived a spirited and graceful young maiden named Hua Mulan, whose heart was as vast as the open plains. She was never one to find joy in the quiet, restrictive art of embroidery, preferring instead to spend her golden afternoons mastering the swift arc of an arrow and the disciplined, powerful rhythm of martial arts. One fateful afternoon, the heavy silence of the village was shattered by the thunderous beat of imperial drums and the loud, echoing announcement of the emperor's urgent mobilization decree for all able-bodied men. The fierce invaders from the desolate northern steppes were sweeping across the Great Wall like a dark tide, and every household was commanded by law to send one strong man to join the imperial army. Mulan's father, a venerable warrior of the past with a soul full of honor, was now old and frail with trembling hands. Yet he began to polish his rusted armor because duty was his highest calling. As the pale moon rose that night, Mulan watched her father's stooped silhouette by the flickering oil lamp, and her heart tightened with a deep, suffocating sense of worry for his fragile life in the coming war. She understood with painful clarity that if her father marched to the frontier in his weakened state, the biting winds of the north and the chaotic blood of battle would ensure he never returned to his home. Driven by a desperate and bold love that outweighed her fear, Mulan made a perilous decision to disguise her true identity and take her father's place among the ranks of the emperor's grand army. With a sharp blade and a steady hand that did not waver, she quietly cut off her long, flowing black hair. Watching the dark tresses fall to the cold floor like a forgotten memory of her girlhood, she carefully donned her father's heavy iron armor, tightened the worn leather belt around her waist, and strapped the ancient family sword firmly to her side. Feeling the weight of generations on her shoulders, before the first light of dawn could touch the horizon, she led her loyal horse out of the stable and vanished into the thick morning fog without daring to whisper a final, tearful goodbye to her sleeping parents. Journeying across jagged mountain ridges and wide, lonely rivers for many days, Mulan eventually joined the endless, dusty line of weary men marching toward the grim and distant training camps of the north. She gave herself a strong male name, steeled her gaze to hide her mounting fear, and practiced speaking in a much deeper, firmer voice until it sounded like the commanding call of a true soldier. Life in the military was a relentless and grueling cycle of exhaustion, with physical training that lasted from the very first light of sunrise until the cold stars began to blink in the velvet sky late at night. Mulan forced herself to work twice as hard as any man around her, pushing her aching body to its absolute limits so that no one would ever suspect the secret she carried beneath her heavy bronze breastplate. She mastered the staggering weight of the long spear, learned to command a galloping warhorse through the chaos of noise, and shot her arrows with such incredible precision they struck the center of every bullseye. Gradually, through her quiet wisdom, her sharp intellect, and her extraordinary courage in the face of grave danger, she earned the unwavering respect and the deep trust of all her brave brothers in arms. The first great battle erupted in a desolate, narrow valley covered in waist-deep snow, where the frozen air was filled with the terrifying, savage cries of a fierce and powerful enemy attacking from the shadows. Amidst the choking black smoke and the deafening, rhythmic clashing of cold steel, Mulan was always the pioneer, a silver flash of bravery charging forward like a storm into the very heart of the enemy's line. She took command of a small, scattered division and executed a series of brilliant, sudden tactics that managed to turn the tide and push back the overwhelming waves of the savage northern invaders. As the long, weary years of war dragged on, the name of the mysterious and talented young general spread like wildfire throughout the ranks, reaching the ears of the high commanders and the emperor himself. However, during a particularly fierce and bloody encounter on the edge of a steep cliff, Mulan was seriously wounded by a stray poisoned arrow and fell into a deep, dark unconsciousness amidst the falling snow, while the camp doctors were frantically working to save her life and treating her life-threatening injuries. The long-kept secret of her true identity was finally revealed to the shocked and silent eyes of the soldiers, though the ancient military laws were incredibly strict regarding such deception. The commander and her loyal comrades could only feel a profound sense of awe for the incredible sacrifice she had made for her father. Instead of demanding the traditional punishment of death, they chose to stand loyally by her side, recognizing her as their true leader and the only one who could guide them in the final, most decisive battle. With her signature clever strategy, Mulan lured the overconfident enemy forces into a massive mountain trap, securing a resounding and historic victory that would be remembered by poets for many centuries to come. The country was finally cleared of the invaders. The golden banners of the emperor flew high once more, and a fragile, beautiful peace returned to the scorched but resiliently lush green fields of the south. The emperor himself summoned the legendary young heroine to his magnificent, gold-leafed palace in the capital, intending to grant her a high noble title and immense riches of jade and silk for her service, but Mulan politely and humbly declined all the fame, the power, and the overflowing chests of gold, kneeling before the throne and asking for only one simple thing in return for her long years of sacrifice. Your Imperial Majesty, I only wish to return to my humble village to care for my elderly father, who has been waiting in the shadows of our home for my return through every season of the war. The great emperor was deeply moved by her profound filial piety and gifted her the finest, swiftest horse in the imperial stables, along with a magnificent robe of pure silk embroidered with golden flowers. Mulan finally stripped off the heavy, blood-stained iron armor of war, put on her simple old dress from her youth, and began the long, reflective journey back across the mountains to her childhood home. The familiar wooden gate of her village finally appeared through the trees, where her father stood leaning heavily against the doorframe, his tired eyes searching the horizon with a flickering glimmer of hope. The old man could hardly believe his weary eyes when he saw his beloved daughter returning to him, no longer a soldier of the realm but a woman of unmatched strength, wisdom, and everlasting grace. The two embraced each other in the dust of the road, weeping tears of overwhelming joy and immense pride that transcended all the silent years of suffering, worry, and the heavy burden of her secret. The villagers crowded into her small, sunlit courtyard to listen in hushed and respectful silence to the extraordinary and harrowing stories of her life on the distant, frozen frontiers of the northern wilderness. Mulan had proven to the entire world that true courage knows no gender and that honor is not defined by one's outward appearance or birth, but by the fire and the strength of one's inner spirit. Her legendary story was told and retold from generation to generation, becoming a shining, eternal example of bravery, love, and the unbreakable, sacred bond between a devoted child and a loving parent. Under the fragrant, blooming branches of the mukin tree in her quiet garden, she lived a long and peaceful life, surrounded by the deep respect and the admiration of everyone who knew her remarkable story. This is the eternal legend of the girl who broke all ancient traditions to save her family and her entire nation from the brink of total ruin, leaving a legacy that will never be forgotten. In the ancient, mist-shrouded era of early Britain, the noble and legendary King Uther Pendragon passed away, leaving the throne of the realm vacant and the entire kingdom without a clear, legitimate, or strong successor to lead them. The land quickly spiraled into a state of absolute and violent chaos, as ambitious, power-hungry lords and cruel barons fought bitterly for the crown, causing the innocent common people to suffer through endless winters of poverty and fear. Merlin, the immortal and wise wizard who possessed the power to see through the complex threads of time, knew that only a king with a truly righteous, humble, and courageous heart could ever restore peace to the fractured land, using his formidable and ancient magic. Merlin summoned a miraculous and awe-inspiring sight in the very center of the great cathedral square in London, which appeared overnight to the utter amazement of the waking local citizens. This divine miracle consisted of a massive, rectangular block of pure white quartz stone, upon which sat a heavy black iron anvil, and driven deep through both was a magnificent, shimmering sword of heavenly and flawless craftsmanship, engraved in elegant, glowing letters of pure gold. Upon the sword's crossguard and hilt were the prophetic and unmistakable words, "Whoso pulleth out this sword from this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England." The news of this magical challenge spread like a wildfire across the snowy countryside, reaching every isolated castle and humble village, attracting thousands of brave knights and wealthy nobles who dreamed of becoming the next great ruler, one after another. The most celebrated warriors, famous champions, and massive giants of the land stepped forward, straining their powerful muscles and shouting with immense effort. But the sword remained completely immovable and silent. As many long years turned into decades, the sword stayed firmly embedded in the stone, eventually becoming a moss-covered monument that stood as a silent, mocking challenge to the vanity, pride, and greed of mortal men. Merlin watched these countless failed attempts from the deep shadows with a mysterious and knowing smile, for he understood that the true king was still a young boy, growing up in total obscurity and simple surroundings. Far away in the quiet, green countryside, a young and slender lad named Arthur was living a simple life, serving faithfully as a loyal squire to his older foster brother, the ambitious and somewhat arrogant Sir Kay. Arthur was a young man of exceptional character and a remarkably pure spirit, always putting the needs of others before his own and performing his tedious daily chores with a sense of quiet dignity and genuine kindness. One fateful and freezing winter, a grand and prestigious tournament was officially announced in the city of London, intended to gather all the noble families together for one final, desperate attempt to claim the legendary sword. Sir Kay, eager to prove his worth as a knight, traveled to the capital accompanied by his father, the Honorable Sir Ector, and young Arthur, who was tasked with managing their restless horses and heavy iron equipment. As they arrived at the bustling tournament grounds, Kay suddenly realized with a cry of intense frustration that he had left his essential battle sword back at the inn, and he sternly ordered Arthur to return and fetch it. Arthur ran through the crowded, muddy streets as fast as his young legs could carry him, but when he reached the inn, he found it locked tight because every servant and innkeeper had gone to watch the opening ceremony. Panicked and deeply worried that he would fail his brother on such a monumental day, Arthur searched the deserted side streets for any weapon that might serve as a temporary replacement for the missing blade of Sir Kay. By pure chance, he wandered into the silent and holy cathedral square and saw the legendary sword CM in the stone, its polished steel catching the pale winter sunlight and glowing with a strange, inviting, and magical warmth. Knowing absolutely nothing of the magical prophecy or the historical significance of this monument, Arthur simply thought it was a discarded weapon that he could borrow for a few hours to save his brother's knightly honor. He stepped up to the massive quartz block, his small and calloused hands gripping the golden hilt, while the very air around him seemed to hum with an ancient, long-forgotten melody of celestial power and royal destiny. Without a single grunt of effort or any visible strain in his body, Arthur pulled the sword, which slid out of the iron anvil as smoothly and silently as a sharp ray of light passing through a clear glass window. Clutching the magnificent and heavy weapon, Arthur ran back to the tournament field and handed it to Kay, still entirely unaware that he had just performed a miracle that would end the kingdom's long period of darkness. When Sir Kay saw the legendary weapon and the unmistakable royal markings on the hilt, he turned pale with shock and immediately ran to his father, falsely claiming that he himself had drawn the sword from the stone. However, The wise and suspicious Sir Ector sensed a lie and led both boys back to the cathedral square, demanding that they replace the sword and demonstrate once and for all who truly possess the power to draw it. Arthur easily slid the enchanted blade back into the iron anvil, but when Sir Kay and even Sir Ector himself tried to pull it out again, the sword remained as solid and unyielding as the ancient mountains themselves. Under the watchful eyes of the rapidly gathering crowd and the stern, judgmental gaze of the Archbishop, Arthur was asked to step forward once more, his young face a mask of confusion, fear, and humble hesitation. As his slender fingers touched the cold, enchanted metal of the hilt, a brilliant and blinding beam of golden light descended from the heavens, illuminating the entire square and bathing the boy in a celestial, royal glow. With one swift, effortless, and incredibly graceful motion, Arthur drew the sword high above his head, and the blade rang out with a clear, bell-like sound that echoed through every street and alleyway of the city of London. The thousands of people watching fell into a profound, breathless, and heavy silence, a moment of collective realization that the long-awaited king had finally appeared in the form of a humble, unknown boy of the people. The proud and powerful lords were initially filled with indignant rage and jealousy, refusing to believe that a mere squire of no apparent noble birth could ever be their rightful sovereign commander and master of the realm. They insisted that the trial be repeated during the Feast of Candlemas and again at Easter, hoping that some other, more famous and wealthy knight would eventually be able to replicate the young boy's miraculous feat. Yet, regardless of the changing seasons or the number of powerful challengers who tried, the result was always exactly the same. Only the hands of young Arthur could move the sword of destiny from its resting place. Finally, Merlin stepped forward from the crowd, his oaken staff glowing with blue power, and revealed to the world that Arthur was actually the secret, biological son of King Uther, hidden away as an infant for safety. The common people, weary of years of war, taxes, and injustice, began to shout with overwhelming joy, recognizing the kindness and the divine sign that seemed to follow the young man wherever he walked or spoke. One by one, the once rebellious knights and the cynical, hardened nobles dropped to their knees in the cold mud of the square, bowing their heads in true submission and swearing their lives to the new king. Arthur accepted the heavy, golden crown of Britain not with a sense of pride or personal triumph, but with a solemn, tearful, and humble vow to rule with justice, mercy, and a heart dedicated to his people. Under the expert and magical guidance of Merlin, King Arthur established the magnificent court of Camelot and the famous Order of the Round Table, where every knight, regardless of status, was treated as a brother. The sword from the stone became an eternal symbol for all of history that true leadership is born from a pure heart and a selfless soul, rather than through brute force, gold, or political manipulation. The legend of the young boy who pulled the sword from the stone has been retold for over 1,000 years, serving as a permanent beacon of hope for anyone who feels small or unimportant in a vast world. And so began the Golden Age of Britain, an era of chivalry, honor, and magic that would be remembered forever in the hearts of men as the greatest and most noble chapter in the history of the world. In the golden, wind-swept heart of ancient Persia, there lived a humble and hard-working woodcutter named Ali Baba, who struggled every single day to provide a meager living for his beloved wife and children. One fateful morning, while he was deep within the shadows of a dense and ancient forest gathering dry wood, he suddenly felt the ground tremble beneath his feet and saw a massive cloud of dust rising on the horizon. Terrified that a band of lawless marauders was approaching, he frantically scrambled up the gnarled branches of a thick, leafy tree, pressing his body against the bark to remain invisible within the dense green canopy. From his hidden vantage point, he watched in breathless silence as 40 fierce and heavily armed men, mounted on powerful stallions, came to a halt before a towering, unnaturally smooth limestone cliff. The captain of the thieves, a man with a scarred face and eyes as cold as flint, stepped forward with an air of absolute authority, raised his silver-hilted sword, and thundered, "Open, sesame!" To Ali Baba's utter bewilderment, the massive, solid rock face groaned as if awakening from a long slumber and slowly split apart, revealing a shimmering, enchanted passage leading into the very soul of the mountain. He remained as motionless as a statue, his heart drumming against his ribs like a trapped bird, as he watched the 40 thieves carry heavy, overflowing sacks of plundered treasure into the darkness of the cave. After a long and agonizing wait, the thieves finally emerged from the mountain with empty hands and satisfied grins, and with a short command from their leader, the great stone door rumbled shut, sealing perfectly. Only when the echoes of the galloping horses had completely faded into the stillness of the afternoon did Ali Baba dare to climb down, his legs shaking uncontrollably as he approached the mysterious, silent wall. With a voice that was barely a rhythmic whisper, he nervously repeated the enchanted words that had been etched into his memory, "Open, sesame," and watched in awe as the mountain transformed once again. Stepping cautiously inside, he found himself in a vast, vaulted cavern overflowing with glittering mountains of gold coins, rare crystalline jewels, and endless bolts of the finest silks and tapestries from across the world. He realized with a heavy heart that this was the secret storehouse for decades of violent crimes, and he decided to take only a few small bags of gold coins, just enough to rescue his family from the grip of poverty. He hurried home under the protective cover of a starlit dusk to show his wife the unexpected fortune. But the secret was soon uncovered by his elder brother, Qasim, a man whose heart was consumed by insatiable greed, driven by a dark jealousy. Qasim cornered Ali Baba in the dead of night and used threats of exposure to force him into revealing the exact location of the forest cave and the secret incantation required to enter. At the very first light of dawn, the ambitious Qasim set out with a train of 10 sturdy donkeys and dozens of large, empty chests, his mind swirling with intoxicating visions of becoming the wealthiest man in all of Persia. He gained entry to the magical cave with ease, but his overwhelming lust for the glittering treasure clouded his fragile memory, and when it came time to depart, the crucial magic words vanished from his mind like smoke. In a state of mounting panic, he shouted, "Open, barley, and open, wheat," his voice growing increasingly shrill and desperate. But the cold, indifferent stone door remained firmly shut, trapping him in his own tomb of gold. When the 40 thieves eventually returned to their lair and discovered the trembling intruder among their stolen riches, they showed him no mercy, striking him down to ensure that their secret would remain hidden from the world. When his brother failed to return home by nightfall, a worried Ali Baba ventured back into the dark forest and was devastated to discover the tragic fate that had befallen Qasim inside the cold, silent cavern. With the assistance of Morgiana, a young servant girl renowned for her incredible intelligence and unwavering loyalty, they devised a brilliant and complex plan to bring Qasim home and bury him without raising any public suspicion. When the thieves later returned to their hideout and found the body missing, a chill went through the group as they realized that another person in the village must possess the secret knowledge of their hidden mountain lair. The captain, burning with a cold and calculating desire for vengeance, disguised himself as a humble traveling oil merchant and began a meticulous house-to-house search through the narrow, winding streets of the nearby town. He eventually tracked down Ali Baba's modest home and arrived at the gate with 39 massive clay jars, claiming to everyone that he was merely a weary trader carrying expensive oil for the bustling local market. Ali Baba, possessing a soul of pure kindness and hospitality, welcomed the suspicious stranger into his courtyard with open arms, offering him a warm, home-cooked meal and a comfortable place to rest his weary head. However, hidden within the dark bellies of 38 of those cold clay jars were the remaining thieves, armed to the teeth and waiting for a specific signal from their captain to leap out and slaughter the household. Late that night, while the rest of the house was draped in a heavy silence, The diligent Morgiana went out to the courtyard to find oil for a flickering lamp and was startled to hear a muffled, rhythmic breathing. Realizing instantly the grave and mortal danger her master was in, she didn't panic, but instead quietly began to heat a giant cauldron of oil over a roaring fire until it was bubbling and searingly hot. With nerves as strong as iron, she moved from jar to jar, pouring the boiling oil into each one and neutralizing the entire band of thieves before they ever had the chance to draw their wicked blades. The captain later crept down to the courtyard in the moonlight to signal his men, but he was met with a terrifying absolute silence and was horrified to discover that every single one of his followers was gone. Overcome by a mixture of fear and blinding rage, he scaled the high garden wall and vanished into the shadows of the night. But he spent every waking moment after that meticulously planning a final, bloody revenge. Many months passed until the captain returned to the village under yet another identity, this time posing as a wealthy and sophisticated silk merchant. Hoping to get close enough to Ali Baba to strike a fatal blow, Ali Baba, still entirely unaware of the merchant's true and deadly identity, felt honored by the attention and invited the man to a grand celebration, treating him as a most distinguished and respected guest of the house. But the watchful Morgiana, who never truly lowered her guard, recognized the wicked, predatory glint in the merchant's eyes and noticed a sharp, curved dagger concealed deep within the folds of his expensive silk robes. To protect her master and his family once again, she donned a beautiful, shimmering costume and requested permission to perform a mesmerizing and traditional sword dance for the entertainment of the assembled guests. As she spun in elegant, rapid circles, the silver blade of her sword caught the orange glow of the candlelight, weaving a hypnotic pattern that drew the captain's attention away from his own murderous intentions. In one swift, graceful, and decisive motion, Morgiana lunged forward through the air and struck a fatal blow directly into the captain's heart, ending his long reign of terror and blood once and for all. Ali Baba was initially horrified by the sudden violence, but when Morgiana pulled back the merchant's robe to reveal the hidden weapon, he fell to his knees, weeping with gratitude for her incredible bravery and wisdom. To honor her unmatched loyalty and her sharp, protective mind, Ali Baba officially granted Morgiana her freedom and joyfully gave his fatherly blessing for her to marry his beloved son in a magnificent, week-long ceremony. They decided to use the vast wealth remaining in the secret cave wisely and generously, sharing the gold with the poor and the elderly, ensuring that no one in their entire village would ever suffer from hunger again. And so, the legendary tale of Ali Baba's kindness and the cleverness of the brave Morgiana was passed down through countless generations, serving as a timeless reminder that wisdom and virtue will always triumph over greed. In the golden age of Baghdad, a city of shimmering domes and bustling spice markets, there lived a restless young man named Sinbad, who spent his days staring at the horizon and dreaming of the vast, uncharted mysteries that lay beyond the sea. Sinbad had inherited a massive fortune from his father, a merchant of great renown, but in his youthful arrogance, he squandered every gold coin on extravagant feasts and fleeting pleasures until he found himself sitting alone in a cold and empty house, realizing that he had hit the very bottom of despair. Sinbad gathered his remaining courage and his last few pieces of silver to purchase a humble merchant ship, vowing to rebuild his family name through the dangerous and unpredictable trade of the ocean. He recruited a crew of weathered sailors who had survived 1,000 storms, and together they set sail from the port of Basra, leaving behind the safety of the land to face the monstrous waves and the whispered legends of the unknown deep. On his first voyage, the crew discovered a breathtaking island that seemed to have appeared out of the mist overnight, covered in lush fruit trees and sparkling streams that promised a paradise of rest after many weeks of salt and hard labor. However, as soon as they built a fire to roast their meat, the very earth beneath their feet began to heave and moan with a deep, subterranean thunder. throwing the terrified sailors into the churning foam of the sea as the island began to sink. They realized too late that the island was actually the mossy, barnacle-encrusted back of a leviathan whale that had been slumbering on the surface for centuries, only to be awakened by the sudden heat of their cooking fire on its sensitive skin. Sinbad was swept away by a powerful current, clinging desperately to a floating wooden crate for 3 days and nights until he was miraculously washed ashore on a kingdom where the king's horses were groomed with brushes of pure, hammered gold. He earned the king's favor by saving the royal stallions from a sea monster, and in return, he was given a ship filled with exotic spices and rare gems, allowing him to return to Baghdad far wealthier than he had been when he first departed. Yet, the comfort of a soft bed and a warm home could not quiet the thunder of the waves in his heart, and soon Sinbad found himself back at the docks, preparing for a second voyage that would test the very limits of his sanity and survival. During this second journey, Sinbad was accidentally abandoned on a silent, sun-bleached island while he was napping in a hidden grove, and he watched in horror as his ship's sails disappeared into the horizon, leaving him a prisoner of the sand. While exploring the interior, he stumbled upon a smooth, white dome of such gargantuan proportions that it blocked out the sun, and he soon realized with a shudder of fear that he was standing next to the unhatched egg of a rockbird. When the mother bird, a creature so large that its wingspan created an eclipse, descended to the nest, Sinbad used his long silk turban to lash himself to its massive, scaly leg, hoping the bird would carry him to a place where humans lived. The rock soared into the clouds and dropped him into a terrifying, shadow-filled canyon where the floor was not made of dirt, but of millions of raw, jagged diamonds that cut through the soles of his boots with every step he took in the dark. This valley of diamonds was also the hunting ground for serpents of impossible size, creatures that could swallow an elephant whole and whose eyes glowed with a predatory hunger that forced Sinbad to hide in the narrowest cracks of the rock. He escaped by tying himself to a carcass of raw meat that had been thrown down by diamond hunters. An eagle snatched the meat and carried Sinbad up to its mountain nest, where he was finally rescued by the astonished and wealthy merchant travelers. Sinbad returned home with a sack of diamonds the size of pomegranates, but his spirit remained restless, and his third voyage saw him shipwrecked on the island of the Zub, a place inhabited by tiny, fierce ape-men who stole his ship and crew. They were then captured by a terrifying, one-eyed giant who lived in a palace of bones and who began to eat the sailors one by one, roasting them over a massive fire while the others watched in a state of paralyzed, weeping terror. Sinbad orchestrated a desperate and bloody escape, leading the remaining men to heat giant iron spits in the fire until they were red hot, which they then used to blind the sleeping giant before fleeing on a makeshift raft they had built in secret. Though most of his friends were lost to the giant's boulders, Sinbad survived to realize that the sea was a cruel mistress that demanded a high price for every secret she revealed. Yet he could not help but return to her embrace again and again. His fourth voyage was a journey into the dark heart of human custom, as he was shipwrecked and captured by a tribe of islanders who initially treated him like royalty, feeding him rich foods that he later realized were meant to fatten him for a feast. He escaped their clutches and found his way to a more civilized city, where he introduced the king to the concept of a leather saddle, an invention that made him so famous and beloved that the king insisted Sinbad marry a noble and wealthy lady. Happiness seemed within his grasp until his wife suddenly fell ill and died, and Sinbad learned to his horror that the local law required the living spouse to be buried alive in a deep cavern alongside their deceased partner to ensure eternal companionship. Lowered into the pitch-black tomb with only a few loaves of bread and a jug of water, Sinbad spent weeks in the company of the dead, eventually following a small animal through a narrow crevice in the rock that led him back to the light of the sea. Each escape from the jaws of death refined Sinbad's soul, stripping away his youthful vanity and replacing it with a profound, humble wisdom and a fierce determination to survive no matter how many times the world tried to bury him alive in the dark. On his fifth voyage, his ship was destroyed by the vengeful rock birds, who dropped massive boulders from the sky in retaliation for the crew breaking one of their eggs, leaving Sinbad to wash up on an island where he met the Old Man of the Sea. This deceptive spirit climbed onto Sinbad's shoulders and refused to let go, wrapping his legs around Sinbad's neck for many weary months until Sinbad managed to intoxicate the creature with fermented grape juice and finally cast off his heavy burden. The sixth journey saw him trapped in a mountain-walled coast where every ship that entered was destined to be crushed. But Sinbad discovered a river that flowed into a dark cave, and he built a raft to follow the water into the unknown depths. The river carried him into the heart of the magnificent kingdom of Serendib, where the emeralds were as large as his head, and the king was so moved by Sinbad's tales of the Caliph of Baghdad that he sent him home with gifts of unimaginable value. By his seventh and final voyage, Sinbad was a man of great age and even greater scars, yet he accepted one last mission from the Caliph to deliver a message to a distant king, only to be captured by pirates and sold into the cruel bonds of slavery, forced by his master to hunt elephants for their ivory. Sinbad eventually earned the respect of the herd. The lead elephant carried him to a hidden valley filled with the bones of thousands of elephants, showing him a peaceful way to collect ivory without killing. Grateful for this revelation, his master granted Sinbad his freedom and a share of the ivory, allowing the old sailor to finally return to Baghdad with his head held high and his heart finally at peace with the many ghosts of his long and turbulent past. After 7 lifetimes of adventure packed into a single man's biography, Sinbad finally hung up his sea boots and retired to a life of quiet reflection, surrounded by the gardens and the family he had fought so hard and so long to earn. He dedicated the remainder of his days to the service of the poor, building hospitals for the sick and schools for the children so that they might learn the value of the world without having to suffer the same terrors that he had endured. Every night, his grand hall was filled with the aroma of roasting meats and the laughter of friends as Sinbad recounted his legendary voyages, his voice rich with the cadence of the waves and the wisdom of a man who had seen the edge of the world. His tales of the rock bird, the Diamond Valley, and the sea monsters became the foundation of Baghdad's storytelling culture, teaching everyone that even the smallest man can overcome the greatest giant if he keeps his wits sharp and his spirit brave. He was no longer the foolish boy who had wasted his father's gold, but a man who had discovered that the only true wealth in this life is the collection of stories and the strength of character built through the fires of great and terrible adversity. Sinbad realized that every shipwreck was a beginning, every cave was a doorway, and every monster was a teacher, and he looked back on his scars not as marks of pain, but as medals of honor won in the service of a life lived to its absolute fullest. The memory of his many ships, from the smallest raft to the grandest galleon, served as a constant reminder that the human spirit is a vessel built to withstand the greatest of storms, as long as it has a destination of hope to guide it home. The legend of Sinbad the Sailor continues to sail through the ocean of time, a timeless testament to the power of curiosity, the necessity of resilience, and the eternal, unquenchable thirst for the wonders that lie just beyond the next blue horizon. In the ancient heart of medieval England, during a dark and turbulent century where the common people lived under the heavy shadow of a cruel and tyrannical government, there arose a legendary hero and master of the longbow known to all as the brave Robin Hood. Robin was once a noble lord with vast estates and a proud family name, but because he dared to speak out against the brutal injustices and the cold-hearted greed of the ruling authorities, he was declared an outlaw and stripped of his titles. With no home left to call his own, he was forced to flee deep into the emerald heart of the mysterious Sherwood Forest. a sprawling wilderness of ancient oaks and tangled briars that offered a natural fortress against those who sought to capture him. Within the safety of these whispering woods, Robin Hood began to gather a band of merry men, composed of displaced farmers, honest tradesmen, and weary souls who had all been pushed to the brink of despair by the kingdom's relentless and unfair laws. These loyal companions were not mere criminals, but courageous rebels who shared a sacred vow to sacrifice their lives if necessary to restore the balance of power and bring a glimmer of hope to a land that had long forgotten the meaning of mercy. Among his most trusted allies was the legendary Little John, a man of such immense physical stature and Herculean strength that he could uproot small trees. Yet he possessed a heart as soft as silk and a loyalty that could never be shaken by any threat. Another key figure was Friar Tuck, a jovial yet formidable monk who had been expelled from his monastery for his unconventional views, and who now used both his deep spiritual wisdom and his lethal skills with a quarterstaff to defend the poor and the weak. Robin Hood himself was whispered to be a supernatural marksman, a man whose eyesight was as sharp as an eagle's and whose steady hands could guide a feathered arrow through the eye of a needle even amidst the howling winds of a winter storm. To stay ahead of his enemies, Robin often donned clever disguises, transforming himself from a rugged woodsman into a tattered beggar or a wandering minstrel so he could walk through the crowded marketplaces unnoticed and gather vital intelligence on the sheriff's next moves. The Sheriff of Nottingham was a man of pure, unadulterated malice, a corrupt official who spent his days plotting new ways to squeeze every last copper coin from the callous hands of the starving peasants who worked the dry and exhausted fields of the Shire. He imposed a series of ruinous taxes and cruel penalties that turned once prosperous villages into ghost towns, leaving countless families to wander the muddy roads with no food to eat and no roof to shelter them from the biting cold of the night. Driven by a burning passion for social justice, Robin Hood stood before his men and swore a solemn, unbreakable oath that he would become the shadow of the oppressed, taking the ill-gotten riches from the arrogant nobility to return them to the suffering poor. The band of outlaws became masters of the ambush, silently dropping from the high branches of the trees to intercept the ornate carriages of corrupt bishops and greedy lords who traveled through the forest with chests overflowing with stolen gold and shimmering silver. Every coin and jewel captured in these daring raids was meticulously accounted for and then secretly delivered under the cover of darkness to the doorsteps of widows, orphans, and the sick who had been abandoned by the very state that was supposed to protect them. As the tales of his generosity spread like wildfire through every tavern and cottage in the north, Robin Hood evolved into a living myth, a beacon of light that reminded every humble soul that the power of the people was greater than the people in power. The Sheriff of Nottingham was consumed by a cold, sharpening rage when he realized that his influence was crumbling and that his personal storehouses were being emptied by a man he considered to be nothing more than a common thief hiding in the bushes. In a desperate bid to regain control, the sheriff issued a high-priced warrant for Robin's head, plastering every stone wall with posters that promised a king's ransom in gold to anyone who would betray the location of the secret camp in the woods. Realizing that brute force alone would not capture the elusive outlaw, the sheriff devised a cunning psychological trap by announcing a grand archery tournament to be held in the city. Knowing that Robin's pride and his skill would be impossible to resist, the prize was an arrow crafted from pure, glittering gold, a trophy of such immense beauty and prestige that it would tempt any archer in the world to step out of the shadows and prove their dominance before the eyes of the entire kingdom. In the flickering firelight of the forest camp, Robin's companions begged him to ignore the bait, warning him that the city walls would become a cage and that the sheriff's elite soldiers were already sharpening their blades in anticipation of his arrival. But Robin Hood, with a mischievous glint in his eye and a fearless spirit that thrived on danger, laughed at the risk and began to prepare a disguise that would allow him to compete right under the nose of the man who hated him the most. He dyed his clothes with the juice of crushed berries, stained his skin with walnut husks, and wore a tattered hood that obscured his noble features, appearing to the world as nothing more than a weathered, one-eyed traveler from a distant and lonely shore. The day of the tournament was a spectacle of color and sound, with trumpets blaring and silk banners snapping in the wind as hundreds of the finest bowmen from across Europe gathered to test their nerves against the most difficult targets ever conceived. The competition was brutal and unforgiving, as the targets were moved further and further back until only the two most elite archers remained, the sheriff's personal champion and the mysterious, ragged stranger who had not yet missed a single shot. For the final tiebreaker, the target was placed at a distance so great that it seemed like a mere speck of dust against the horizon, requiring the archer to calculate the wind, the humidity, and the very curvature of the earth to hit the mark. The sheriff's champion stepped forward with arrogance, drawing a heavy bow of yew and releasing a shot that landed a hair's breadth from the center, a feat of skill so impressive that the noble guests began to cheer for his inevitable victory. Then, the ragged stranger stepped to the line, the crowd falling into a tense and heavy silence as he raised a simple bow made of seasoned forest oak, his breathing becoming as slow and steady as the rhythm of the ancient trees themselves. With a sudden, sharp twang, his arrow cut through the air like a bolt of lightning, miraculously splitting the champion's arrow down the center before burying itself deep into the very heart of the golden bullseye, leaving the audience breathless with awe. As Robin stepped forward to claim the golden prize, he leaned in and whispered his true name to the sheriff, before suddenly pulling off his disguise and signaling to his men who were hidden among the commoners in the vast, cheering crowd. Chaos erupted instantly as the sheriff screamed for his guards to seize the outlaw, but Robin's men unleashed a hail of blunted arrows and smoke bombs, creating a wall of confusion that allowed them to move through the panicked lines of soldiers. Robin Hood fought with the grace of a dancer and the ferocity of a lion, using his bow as a staff to knock aside the armored guards while his companions created a protective circle around him as they fought their way toward the city's massive stone gates. They escaped the city on horseback, the sound of galloping hooves echoing against the cobblestones as they vanished back into the leafy sanctuary of Sherwood, leaving the sheriff to roar in futile anger at the empty space where his prisoner had been. This victory cemented Robin's status as a champion of the people, and soon, the merry men grew from a small band of fugitives into a formidable revolutionary force that held the balance of power in the entire northern region of the country. Amidst the clashing of swords and the constant threat of war, Robin found a source of peace in his love for the beautiful maid Marian, a high-born lady who risked her life and social standing to provide the outlaws with resources and secret information. Marian was the invisible heart of the rebellion, using her influence within the royal court to misdirect the sheriff's spies and to ensure that Robin was always one step ahead of the massive military expeditions sent to destroy his forest home. Beneath the sprawling canopy of the major oak, Robin and Marian pledged their lives not just to each other, but to the dream of a future where no child would go hungry and no man would be punished for the crime of being poor. As the decades rolled by, the exploits of Robin Hood were woven into the very fabric of English folklore, his name becoming a rhythmic chant in the songs of traveling bards and a bedtime story told by mothers to inspire courage in their sons. Even when the rightful and compassionate King Richard returned from the Crusades to restore order and grant Robin a full pardon, the legend of the man in green remained a powerful symbol that transcended any individual ruler or government. Robin Hood taught the world that true nobility is not found in a drop of blood or a piece of parchment, but in the willingness to stand up for the voiceless and to fight for the dignity of every human being regardless of their status. His story remains an eternal flame of inspiration, reminding every generation that, as long as there is greed and oppression, there will always be a need for a hero who dares to steal from the darkness to give back to the light. In the heart of old London, where fog rolled through cobblestone streets, the Darling family lived in a grand house where the nursery walls were decorated with the vibrant and magical colors of endless childhood imagination. Wendy Darling, the eldest daughter, was a gifted storyteller who spent her nights weaving enchanting tales of a boy who could fly through the sky and a faraway land where children never had to grow up. One fateful evening, a mischievous boy named Peter Pan, along with his tiny, shimmering fairy Tinker Bell, fluttered through the open nursery window in search of Peter's lost shadow that had a mind of its own. After Wendy skillfully sewed the shadow back to Peter's heels, the grateful boy invited her and her brothers to fly away with him to a mystical world free from the boring roles and responsibilities of adults. "Just think of the loveliest things," Peter whispered with a grin, as a dusting of Tinker Bell's glowing pixie dust lifted the three children high above their beds and out into the cool night air. They soared majestically past the great clock of Big Ben, navigating by the brightest stars toward the second glowing light on the right, flying straight on until the first light of morning broke over the horizon. Beneath them, the island of Neverland appeared like a vivid kaleidoscope of emerald jungles, hidden shimmering lagoons, and jagged mountains where every secret dream and every terrifying nightmare lived side by side in eternal, magical conflict. Hidden deep within the forest, inside the trunks of hollow trees, lived the Lost Boys, a band of spirited orphans who looked to Peter Pan as their fearless protector and daring leader in all their adventures. However, the peace of the island was threatened by the pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, commanded by the terrifying and vengeful Captain James Hook, whose very name struck fear into the hearts of everyone in Neverland. Hook's sharp iron hook glinted menacingly in the sun, a bitter reminder of the day Peter Pan had cut off his right hand during a spectacular duel, tossing the limb to a passing beast as an insult unknown to many. A colossal crocodile had tasted the captain's hand and now followed the ship everywhere, patiently lurking in the dark waters and hoping to eventually finish the rest of the meal he had started. Fortunately for Hook, the crocodile had swallowed a ticking clock, and the steady tick-tock sound served as a constant warning, sending the mighty captain into a state of trembling, hysterical panic whenever the sound drew near. Upon the children's arrival, Tinker Bell's fierce jealousy of Wendy flared up, and she wickedly tricked the Lost Boys into shooting an arrow at Wendy as she flew, hoping to remove her rival once and for all. Peter arrived just in time to save Wendy, and she soon took on the role of mother for the group, telling bedtime stories and mending their tattered clothes beneath the roots of the ancient, secret trees. One beautiful morning, Peter took Wendy to the Mermaid's Lagoon, where the water was clear as glass and the beautiful mermaids spent their days brushing their long hair and singing melodies that echoed off the cliffs. Their peace was shattered when they spotted Captain Hook's rowing boat, carrying the captured Princess Tiger Lily toward the dangerous caverns of Skull Rock, where the incoming tide threatened to drown her if she didn't speak. Peter engaged Hook in a daring sword fight on the slippery cliffs, mocking the pirate with his agility before diving into the cold sea to rescue the princess just as the water reached her chin. To celebrate her safe return, the native tribe hosted a grand festival filled with drums and traditional dancing, naming Peter Pan a great warrior and a blood brother of the forest in a magnificent ceremony. However, the cunning Captain Hook was not finished. He kidnapped the fragile Tinker Bell and played upon her jealousy of Wendy to discover the exact location of the boys' secret underground home hidden in the woods. While Peter was out scouting, the pirates launched a brutal surprise attack, capturing Wendy and the Lost Boys, dragging them away in heavy iron chains to the Jolly Roger to face a grim and uncertain fate. Hook left a final, deadly gift for his rival, a vial of powerful poison disguised as Peter's medicine, hoping to end the boy's life while he slept soundly. Unaware that his friends had been stolen, Tinker Bell managed to break free and race back just in time, drinking the deadly poison herself to protect Peter from the captain's plot, her tiny body glowing with a fading light as she collapsed. As her light began to die, Peter wept for his friend and called out to every child in the world, asking them to believe in magic and the existence of fairies to save her from darkness. "I believe in fairies," he cried with all his heart, and the sound of a million children clapping their hands brought Tinker Bell back to brilliant life, her wings shimmering with more power than ever before. Meanwhile, on the deck of the Jolly Roger, the cruel pirates were forcing Wendy to walk the narrow wooden plank over shark-infested waters. While the boys watched in helpless horror from the mast of the ship, suddenly, the air was filled with Peter Pan's triumphant crow, as he dropped from the rigging like a hunting hawk to challenge the pirate crew, his silver sword glinting as he began his greatest rescue. A massive battle erupted on the wooden deck, with the lost boys using their slingshots and energy to drive the terrified pirate crew into the sea. Reclaiming the ship in a whirlwind of exciting action, Peter and Captain Hook finally faced each other in a climactic duel, their blades clashing in a rhythmic dance of steel across the ship's helm. As the captain realized he was finally outmatched by Peter with a swift move, Peter disarmed the captain, and the panicked Hook tumbled over the wooden railing into the waiting, wide-open jaws of the ticking crocodile that had waited years for this very specific moment. The remaining pirates fled in their small lifeboats, leaving the Jolly Roger in the hands of Peter Pan and his brave band of adventurers, who cheered as the pirate flag was lowered for the last time. Peter sprinkled the ship with a massive cloud of Tinker Bell's pixie dust, causing the heavy wooden vessel to rise majestically into the night sky, turning the pirate ship into a golden vessel that sailed. The ship sailed past the glowing moon and over the lights of London, carrying Wendy and her brothers back to the safety of their nursery window, where the familiar sights of home waited for them. Wendy looked at Peter and realized with a heavy heart that she was finally ready to grow up and embrace the real world, even if it meant leaving the magic of Neverland behind her forever. Peter Pan watched silently from the windowsill as the darling parents rushed into the room to embrace their children, his heart feeling a strange sadness as he realized the gap between their worlds was widening. He promised to return for Wendy every single spring, so she could help him with his spring cleaning and tell him new stories, ensuring that their bond would never truly be broken by the years. Wendy eventually grew into a wise woman and had children of her own, but she never once forgot the boy with the feathered cap who had taught her how to fly and showed her magic. She passed down his legendary stories to her daughter Jane, ensuring that the spirit of Peter Pan and the magic of Tinker Bell would live on through every new generation of dreamers who looked up. Peter Pan remained in Neverland, forever young, forever bold, and forever free, leading new adventures for every child who felt lost in the world and needed a little bit of magic to find their way. The legend of Peter Pan reminds us that while we must eventually grow up and take on adult burdens, we should never lose the spark of wonder that lives in the quiet corners of our hearts. Whenever the night wind blows from the second star to the right, if you listen closely, you can still hear the distant, joyous laughter of Peter Pan, the boy who lived forever in our dreams. Within the labyrinthine alleyways and beneath the perpetually scorching sun of the ancient, vibrant city of Agrabah, resided the cunning but fundamentally good-hearted youth, Aladdin, whose primary occupation was skillfully surviving the systemic injustices of extreme poverty. His daily routine consisted of navigating the crowded, spice-scented marketplace, adeptly dodging the overzealous royal guards, all while constantly nurturing a fervent, secret desire for a dignified life far removed from constant hunger and threadbare garments. Aladdin's most profound and unyielding ambition was focused entirely on liberating his frail, aging mother from the heavy burden of endless toil, envisioning a future where she could finally rest comfortably and peacefully in a secure home. One deceptively ordinary afternoon, a tall, elegantly robed man of commanding presence, whose eyes held a strangely unsettling, cold calculation, approached Aladdin, weaving an elaborate, fabricated tale of being his long-lost, extremely wealthy maternal uncle. This imposing, false relative was none other than a formidable, power-hungry sorcerer originating from the mysterious, distant Maghreb, meticulously orchestrating a complex scheme to acquire a potent, world-altering magical artifact for his destructive ends. The sorcerer, employing carefully rehearsed, persuasive eloquence, promised Aladdin a swift, unbelievable transformation into a tremendously affluent and universally respected nobleman, an irresistible offer designed to exploit the boy's deepest vulnerabilities, completely overcome by the intoxicating lure of instantaneous fortune and desperate for a radical change in circumstances. The knave Aladdin wholeheartedly embraced the outwardly generous but inherently treacherous proposal. Ignoring the faint warning signs of the man's cold demeanor, their clandestine journey led them far away from the familiar city sounds, trekking laboriously across the vast, silent, golden dunes until they eventually arrived at an isolated, ominous clearing dominated by an enormous, intricately carved stone slab. After performing a spectacular, terrifying array of magical gestures and whispering dark, guttural incantations, the massive stone slab violently lifted, grudgingly exposing the gaping, impossibly dark maw of the legendary cavern below. The sorcerer, his voice dropping to a low, intense conspiratorial tone, explained that this forbidden locale was the infamous Cave of Wonders, which held countless ancient riches, but most importantly, a single, unassuming bronze lamp. Aladdin was sternly instructed to make the perilous descent, retrieve only the specific dust-caked oil lamp, and rigorously avoid touching any of the tempting, distracting gold and precious stones littering the floor. Despite the overwhelming, paralyzing fear gripping his heart, Aladdin resolutely stepped into the echoing blackness, driven forward by the profound hope that this solitary act would be the definitive key to unlocking his new, prosperous destiny. The subterranean space was a breathtaking, dizzying spectacle, illuminating the sheer magnitude of forgotten treasure, cascading waterfalls of jewels and gleaming mountains of antique gold coins, a sight intended to test the strongest resolve, successfully resisting the powerful, avaricious temptation. Aladdin carefully located the desired artifact, finding the tarnished, heavy oil lamp nestled deep within the inner recesses of the dusty chamber. Upon returning to the illuminated entrance, Aladdin cautiously requested the sorcerer's strong aid to pull him out of the deep shaft before handing over the lamp, a moment of street-smart wisdom born of ingrained distrust, driven to a frenzy by his burning obsession and utter lack of patience. The sorcerer reacted with savage fury, violently slamming the massive stone lid back into place, sealing Aladdin's fate with a sickening, final thud. Utterly abandoned and consumed by absolute despair, Aladdin slumped against the cold stone, realizing the immense tragedy of his situation. Surrounded by boundless wealth that now served only as a cold, pointless monument to his imminent demise, while nervously pacing the confined space, rubbing his trembling hands together for comfort, Aladdin unknowingly brushed the ancient, gritty surface of the plain oil lamp he still tightly clutched. With an immediate, earth-shaking detonation of noise and a dizzying funnel of smoking, ethereal light, a colossal, muscle-bound genie, radiant in shifting shades of sapphire and azure, instantly materialized before the astonished youth. The booming, reverberating voice of the genie announced his eternal existence as the powerful, magical slave to the lamp, now unequivocally bound to serve the commands of its frightened, bewildered new master, quickly transitioning from terror to an exhilarating, dizzying comprehension. Aladdin suddenly grasped the incredible, mind-boggling reality that he possessed a force capable of manipulating the very fabric of existence. His very first, deeply heartfelt command bypassed all material desires, focusing purely on survival. He simply wished to be instantly transported, safe and sound, far away from the dark tomb and back to his small, familiar house. The omnipresent genie granted the earnest plea effortlessly, instantly dissolving the physical space between them, safely delivering Aladdin and the magical vessel back into the comforting familiarity of his mother's humble kitchen. Over time, Aladdin meticulously learned the intricacies and strict limitations of the three powerful wishes, understanding that true, spontaneous love and resurrection from death were fundamentally outside the genie's omnipotence. He carefully utilized his second wish, meticulously commanding the genie to meticulously fabricate an identity for him as a fabulously wealthy, charming, and highly respected prince of unquestionable royal lineage. Backed by the genie's reality-altering magic, Aladdin quickly acquired a palatial, snow-white residence filled with priceless artifacts, along with a perfectly choreographed retinue of devoted, impeccably uniformed attendants. Completing his unbelievable transformation, this meticulously constructed royal facade provided Aladdin with the necessary social standing to formally petition the Sultan for the coveted hand of the exquisitely beautiful and fiercely intelligent Princess Jasmine. Princess Jasmine, renowned across the continents for her unwavering spirit and determined refusal to enter into an emotionally sterile, politically motivated marriage, regarded the new prince with initial, profound skepticism and reserve. Nevertheless, Aladdin's genuine warmth, his underlying innate humility, and shared adventurous spirit gradually broke down the princess's formidable defenses, culminating in a passionate, authentic union of deep affection. Their glorious, newfound marital bliss and the tranquility of the kingdom were violently shattered by the meticulous, patient reappearance of the relentlessly vindictive, dark-hearted sorcerer, concealing his malevolence beneath the guise of a harmless, wandering street peddler. The sorcerer loudly called out his deceptive, memorable offer of new lamps for old, banking on the ignorance of the palace staff. The unsuspecting Princess Jasmine, believing the tarnished old oil lamp was merely worthless clutter, carelessly exchanged the powerful artifact for the shiny, superficial brass one offered by the cunning old man. With the supreme power of the lamp finally secured, the triumphant sorcerer immediately commanded the heartbroken genie to magically and instantaneously relocate the entire enormous palace and the terrified princess to his remote, desolate desert fortress. Aladdin returned home from hunting to a horrifying void where his palace had stood and his beloved wife was missing, left completely alone with only the weak, secondary power of the ancient ring's genie, utilizing the minor, but crucially helpful, power of the ring-dwelling genie. Aladdin was swiftly and secretly transported across the treacherous, dark waters directly to the isolated, forbidding site of the sorcerer's new stronghold. Displaying profound courage and sharp tactical thinking, he devised an intricate plan to personally recover the stolen lamp through clever subterfuge, entirely preserving his last powerful wish for the safety of the princess. In a climactic and intensely dramatic struggle of wits against dark magic, Aladdin expertly tricked the overconfident sorcerer, seizing the magical lamp back from his grasp at the peak of the villain's hubris. His very last and most selfless command to the genie was to permanently neutralize the great threat, banishing the wicked, treacherous sorcerer to an inescapable, silent dimension for the remainder of time. The entire majestic palace, with the beautiful, greatly relieved Princess Jasmine inside, was instantaneously and safely returned to its original, familiar location in Agrabah, signaling the definitive and joyful conclusion to the horrific ordeal. Demonstrating his supreme, noble character, Aladdin utilized his ultimate freedom to generously grant the loyal, ancient genie his complete and total emancipation from the lamp's bondage, ensuring that he and Princess Jasmine would forever live their extraordinarily happy lives together, solely sustained by their unwavering love, wisdom, and remarkable courage.